The trader didn't even look her in the eye, just nudged her forward with the end of his rifle stock, like she was a mule too stubborn to move. Her wrists were roped in front of her, and her chin was crusted with dried blood. She didn't speak. She hadn't spoken since sundown the day before. "Springfield," the trader said, holding up the rifle. "Clean bore. Shoots straight." Across the fire, the man they called Ransom Judd didn't answer. He just stared at the girl. The trader snorted. "What? You want to haggle? She's not worth much more. Got a busted lip and won't work. Won't talk, neither. Bit one of my men on the trail." Still, Ransom said nothing. Just stood and walked around the fire, slow, until he was beside the girl. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her eyes. Her ankles were swollen from the rope that had been cinched too tight, too long. Her feet were bare. "Take the rifle," the trader said again. "A good deal for a quiet woman." Ransom didn't look at the rifle. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small skin pouch and tossed it to the ground. A few coins jingled inside. The trader squinted. Hell, that's less than the rifle's worth." Ransom looked at him now. One glance. Nothing in his eyes but an old tiredness, like someone who'd been walking a long road and didn't care much where it ended. He didn't raise his voice. "You can take it or you can leave." The trader licked his lips. Greed always had a way of bowing to silence. He bent, scooped up the pouch, and with a shrug, shouldered the rifle and walked off into the pines, muttering about stubborn fools. The fire crackled. The girl still hadn't looked up. Ransom pulled out his knife. The blade glinted once in the firelight before he crouched and cut the ropes from her wrists and ankles. She didn't thank him, just stood there, swaying like a tree half-cut, too shocked to fall. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer comfort. He just turned and walked toward his pack mule. After a few seconds, she followed. "Let's go back. Back before the trade, before the rope burns and the silence. Back before the girl was traded like an old coat for a rifle that probably jammed in the rain. Back to the man himself." Ransom Judd had lived in the mountains for 11 years. Nobody really knew where he came from. Some said Missouri. Others whispered Georgia, back when the red dirt still soaked through Union boots. What was certain was this: Ransom didn't bother no one, and he didn't tolerate nonsense. He'd built his cabin on the shoulder of a forgotten ridge near Elk Hollow, 2 days /ride from the nearest town. Folks in town only saw him once a month, if that, when he came to trade hides and buy salt, flour, bullets. He never drank, he never laughed, and he never raised his voice. There was a time once when folks tried to poke at him, tried to get under his skin like pine splinters. One man, Roscoe Tanner, told a joke about mountain men and the sheep that keep 'em warm. Ransom didn't swing, didn't shout. He just looked Roscoe dead in the eye and said, calm as creek water, "You ever want to wake up with teeth again, don't say my name again." Roscoe never did. It wasn't that Ransom was mean. He just wasn't anything else either. He lived in the quiet, in the hush between birdsong and snowfall. People don't understand men like that, so they leave them be. He'd found the girl at a trader's camp on the Southern Trail, just off the wash that ran dry every July. He'd come looking for powder and new boots. Instead, he found her, tied to a cedar post, lips split, wrists purple. She was maybe 16, 17 if you were generous. Her hair was matted and her dress, what little was left of it, clung to her like rags on a scarecrow. He'd watched her a while, not with lust, not even with pity, just watching, like trying to understand what made a thing still stand when everything else said it should have fallen. And now, back at his camp, she sat cross-legged by the fire, arms wrapped around herself. Ransom didn't press her. He cooked beans in a dented tin pot and handed her the cup first. She took it without a word, but drank like someone who'd been empty for days. Night fell slow, with stars like scattered salt across a black tablecloth. Ransom pulled his buffalo hide over his shoulders and leaned back against a stump. "You can sleep inside," he said, motioning to the small lean-to. She didn't answer, but she crawled over and ducked inside. Then he added, almost to himself, Door don't lock. The fire hissed. The wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere down in the hollow, a coyote called. Ransom stared into the flames, silent as ever, but something had changed. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his past. But something unspoken had passed between them. Not a promise, not a plan, just the kind of silent understanding that grows only in places where the world has forgotten to look. Tomorrow, someone would ask where he'd found her. Tomorrow, someone would call it a mistake. But tonight, she was warm, and he hadn't had to raise his voice to make it happen. And that, to him, was enough. Ransom woke before the sun rose. That was his way, always had been. He moved quiet, feeding the fire, boiling water for coffee. The girl still lay inside the lean-to, knees drawn to her chest, covered by a heavy wool blanket he'd tossed over her during the night. She hadn't stirred once. Either she trusted him or she was too worn out to care. By the time the morning light touched the tops of the pines, she was sitting up. Her eyes were open, but distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. A place without trees or birdsong or men who traded people for guns. "You hungry?" Ransom asked, pouring coffee into a battered tin cup. She didn't answer. He didn't push. He set the cup beside her, along with a strip of dried venison and half a cornbread wedge. She picked at it slowly, still didn't speak. By mid-morning they were riding. Ransom on his mule, the girl on his packhorse. The trail north cut through thick lodgepole and sagebrush, climbing toward the high meadows where his cabin stood. Neither of them said a word the entire ride. It wasn't until they reached the ridge, overlooking the valley, that she spoke for the first time. "My name's Hallie," she said, her voice ragged from disuse. Ransom nodded, not looking back. "All right, Hallie." She didn't offer more, and he didn't ask. They reached the cabin by dusk, a weathered structure tucked into the slope with a moss-covered roof and a fence half swallowed by wild grass. Smoke still curled from the chimney where he /D left coals banked in the hearth the week before. Ransom helped her down, careful not to touch her. He opened the door and gestured her inside. She hesitated. "You don't owe me," he said softly, sensing her fear. "You're not here for anything, just here." That night, she slept in the bed. He took the floor. It wasn't until 3 days later that trouble came. It came in the form of a rider from Elk Hollow, a ranch hand named Virgil Talbot, carrying a message and an attitude. Virgil was the kind of man who always had something to say and said it twice to make sure you heard. He reined up outside Ransom's fence, spitting chaw into the dirt. "That girl with you?" he called out. "She was with the Hammonds boys 3 days ago. Word is, they were looking / to sell her to a mining crew down in Flat Ridge." Ransom didn't answer. Virgil narrowed his eyes. "You know what kind of trouble she brings? Ain't no girl travels with Hammonds without some dirt on her. And now she's up here, hiding / with a man who don't talk to nobody? That don't sit right." Ransom stepped off his porch slow, walked toward the gate. Hallie watched from the doorway, hands gripping the frame. Virgil smirked. "You got half the town wonderin' if you lost your mind." Ransom stopped a few paces from him. Calm, quiet. "She's a person," he said. Virgil blinked. "What?" "She's not a rumor, not a warning. She's a person." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Virgil scoffed. "You always were a strange one, Ransom. Don't come cryin' when the Hammonds ride back up lookin' for their property. / 'cause they ain't just gonna knock." He turned his horse and trotted off, dust rising behind him like smoke. That night, Hallie didn't eat much. She sat near the hearth, knees pulled close, staring into the flames. "You don't have to explain nothin' / Ransom said, handing her a cup of warm milk. "But folks in town, they'll talk." She nodded slowly. "They already did when I lived there." Ransom crouched beside the fire, stirring the coals. He didn't ask more. He never did. But Hallie kept talking, almost in a whisper, like she had to say it before it broke inside her. "They came to our ranch at night. Said Pa owed money. I don't know if he did. He never got to answer. They shot him, made Ma watch. Took me. Left her there screamin'. She bit her lip hard. I tried to run. twice. Got this for it. She pulled down the edge of her dress, showing a welt that hadn't yet healed across her shoulder. Ransom didn't react, didn't clench his fists, didn't stand in rage. He just looked at her, his face unreadable, and said, "You're safe now." "But I ain't," she whispered. "Not really." Ransom looked to the window. Outside, the woods were dark, the sky deeper still. "You can stay as long as you want," he said. "Ain't no locks here. Ain't no collars either." Hallie blinked at that. "No one's ever said that to me before." Ransom sipped his coffee. People don't say much of what matters. They both stared into the fire a long while after that. Neither one of them mentioned the Hammonds by name, but they both knew the kind of men who called a girl property, didn't give up just because a trade was made. And they both knew eventually someone was going to come riding. The air turned sharp 3 mornings later. Not with cold, with quiet. Ransom was splitting wood behind the cabin when he noticed it. The kind of silence that presses in from all sides, like the forest is holding its breath. No birdsong, no chipmunks scurrying, just stillness. He paused, axe mid-swing, and turned toward the ridgeline. The trees there were thick, but he could feel them watching. Shadows too still to be branches. No movement, no sound. He walked back toward the cabin slow, every step measured. Hallie was already at the door, her face pale. "They're here," she said. He nodded. Neither asked how the other knew. That night he didn't sleep. Neither did she. They sat by the fire, listening. By dawn, hoofbeats echoed through the valley. 5 riders, cutting through the mist like wolves through a flock. At the front rode Zebulon Hammonds, broad-shouldered, red-bearded, a pistol on each hip. He was the kind of man who never smiled unless something was burning. They didn't stop at the gate, didn't dismount. Zebulon looked down from his saddle and tipped his hat, mock gentle. "Mornin', Judd." Ransom stood on the porch, arms at his sides. Not a rifle in sight, not even his knife on his belt. Zebulon clicked his tongue. "We come peaceful, seein' as how you're just a man with a cabin and a conscience. But that girl you got, she's ours." Ransom didn't blink. "She's not a thing." Zebulon chuckled. "I reckon we disagree." The man beside him, a lean, snake-eyed fella named Mitchum, spit a glob of tobacco into Ransom's yard. "We paid for her, fed her, kept her. You just traded coin like it was a pound of flour. That don't make it right." Inside, Hallie gripped the windowsill. Her hands trembled, but her face didn't flinch. She'd seen these men before, smelled their breath, felt their hands. Her knees went weak, but she didn't fall. Zebulon leaned forward in his saddle. "You got a choice, Judd. Step aside, let us take what's ours, and we won't burn this place to the ground. You can go back to being quiet and alone. Or you can die for a girl you just met." Ransom took a breath, then another, then spoke, still soft, still calm. "You're not talking her." Zebulon's face went cold. "You got a death wish?" "No," Ransom said. "I got a spine." Mitchum reached for his revolver, just a twitch, and that was enough. The crack of a rifle rang out from the trees to the west. Mitchum's hat flew off his head and landed in the dirt. Zebulon jerked in surprise, reaching for his gun, but didn't draw. Another shot, this one closer. Then, from the trees, emerged a half-dozen figures. Rough men in buckskins, rifles drawn, eyes hard. Hunters, trappers, mountain folk, men like Ransom, quiet, watchful, and not fond of slavers. Among them was a short, one-eyed fellow named Cass Buckley, whose laugh was louder than most men's anger. He walked forward now, rifle loose in his arms. "Zeb," he drawled, "I know that girl, and I know what y'all did to her. We heard her screams in the canyon 2 weeks back. You think mountain men don't pay attention? You think we ain't got ears?" Zebulon looked between the rifles, calculating. "You kill us," he said slowly, "and the law'll come sniffin' backslash. We're still white men." Cass laughed. "So's a rattlesnake. Don't mean I won't crush its head." The silence that followed was tighter than any noose. Zebulon shifted in his saddle. This ain't over. Cass grinned. It is if you leave now. Zebulon spat, turned his horse. The others followed. 5 riders came. 5 riders left. Ransom didn't speak for a long time. Then, to Cass, you didn't have to ride out. Cass shrugged. She ain't property. And you ain't the only one out here with a soul. Ransom nodded once. Cass tipped his hat to Hallie, still watching from the window. You're safe now, miss. For real this time. Hallie blinked fast. Thank you. They left without fanfare. No war whoops. No boasts. Just the quiet sound of justice done without a sermon. That night, Ransom didn't say much. Hallie sat beside the fire, arms wrapped around her knees. Why'd they come? She asked. He stirred the coals. Because they thought nobody would stop them. She looked over. And why did you? He didn't answer at first. Then, without looking up, he said, because no one stopped them before. Outside, the woods were alive again. Owls hooting, wind stirring the leaves. But inside, everything was still and safe. For now, the sky was soft the next morning, that kind of silver gray that came before rain. Ransom was already outside, stacking firewood by the fence line, when Hallie stepped onto the porch. She held the blanket tight around her shoulders, but not out of fear, just for warmth. She watched him a moment. You don't talk much, do you? She asked. Ransom didn't stop moving. Only when there's something worth saying. She smiled faintly. It was the first time he'd seen her smile. He glanced up. You sleep all right? Better than I have in months. He nodded and handed her a split log. She took it without hesitation, following him to the stacked pile. For a while they worked like that, side by side, not saying much, but something unspoken starting to grow, like trust, like breath after drowning. That afternoon the rain came, soft at first, then steady, drumming on the roof and turning the yard to mud. Inside, Ransom stirred a pot of stew while Hallie sat by the hearth, patching a tear in an old flannel shirt he'd left hanging near the door. He glanced over. You sew? My ma taught me. Said a woman who could mend was a woman who could survive. She paused. I used to think surviving meant running, but maybe it don't. Ransom looked at her. You're not running now. She met his gaze. Something in her eyes had changed. The haunted look had softened, replaced with something clearer, a quiet strength. I want to stay, she said. He didn't answer right away, just handed her a spoonful of stew to taste. She did and nodded. Good. Needs salt. He smiled barely, but she saw it. And that smile was worth more than any promise. That night, she asked him about the photograph. It sat on a shelf above the hearth, a small tintype in a wooden frame, its edges worn smooth by time. You never mentioned her, Hallie said softly. Ransom looked at the fire. Didn't need to. Hallie waited. Her name was Lena, he said finally. Married her young. Too young, maybe. We had a son. Died from fever the first winter. She died the next spring. He took. Content truncated due to size limit. Use page ranges or line ranges to read remaining content. Carver Gate. A crude drawing of a woman hanging from a tree, with the word tainted scrawled beneath in red paint. Amos burned it without a word. And that night, for the first time, Clara didn't sleep in the corner. She lay beside him, eyes open, still breathing shallow, but close enough that their shoulders touched. Not from fear, from choice. And that made all the difference. Rain fell the next morning, soft, steady, and rare for August. It soaked the dirt roads, dampened the anger in the wind, and turned the pine needles slick beneath Amos Carver's boots. Inside the cabin, Clara moved slower than usual, stirring oats on the stove with one hand while the other traced lazy circles across the worn wood counter. She hadn't spoken since the sign. Not about it, not about the Comanche riders, not even about sharing a bed for the first time. But Amos didn't push her. He'd learned long ago, words come when the silence has done its work. Outside, the storm washed away most of the footprints, but the damage lingered. The townsfolk might have been too afraid to string her up, but the warning was clear. They wanted her gone, and if not her, then him. By noon, Amos heard hoofbeats again. He didn't reach for the rifle this time. He just opened the cabin door and waited. It was Sheriff Henley, dripping and sour-faced, with a paper sealed in wax. "Morning, Carver," the sheriff said, dismounting. Amos didn't answer. Henley cleared his throat and held out the paper. "Town council met. You weren't invited. Decision was made." Amos took the paper, read it once, twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his coat. Henley nodded like it hurt his neck. "You've got till sundown. Pack what you need." Clara had stepped to the threshold behind Amos. Her hair was damp from where it clung to her collarbone. "What happens if we don't?" she asked. Henley shifted his boots on the wet earth. "I'm not saying the men'll come with torches, but I'm not saying they won't either." Amos nodded. "That it?" The sheriff hesitated. For just a second, his eyes met Clara's, and something flickered. Guilt, shame, or maybe just tiredness. "That's it." He turned and rode off into the rain. Amos shut the door behind him and leaned against it. The silence stretched again, heavy this time, filled with a decision neither wanted to speak aloud. She turned back to the stove. "You really think they'll come?" "They're scared," he said. "Scared men do stupid things." He crossed the room, poured coffee into 2 tin mugs, and set one beside her on the table. "We don't run," she said, barely above a whisper. "No, I've run enough. I know." Her eyes met his, slow and steady. "Then we stay." Amos didn't nod. He didn't speak. He simply reached for the Winchester, opened the door again, and stepped out onto the porch. The clouds were parting. The sky, still bruised and gray, was starting to bleed gold near the horizon. That's when he saw the first figures on the road. 6 men, 2 carrying shotguns, one with a noose hanging from his belt like he thought it made him brave. They weren't hiding their intent. Amos didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just walked to the center of the clearing and stood like a monument. Behind him, Clara stepped out too, wearing the shawl she'd mended with her own hands, hair tied back, shoulders square. The men stopped about 20 yards out. "You had your warning," the one with the noose said. Amos didn't move. "And I gave you mine." The men looked unsure now. Maybe it was the way Amos stood. Maybe it was the look in Clara's eyes. Not fear, not anymore, just a stillness that made the wind seem louder. Then a sound rose behind the trees. Another set of hoofbeats. Dozens. The men turned. Out of the tree line came horses. Riders. Comanche. At least 20 of them, moving slow, deliberate. At their head was Toka. Face painted again, but this time with marks of protection, not mourning. He didn't raise a spear. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just rode forward and stopped beside Amos. "She sent word," Toka said. "We came not for war, but for witness." The men with the shotguns shifted. One even stepped back. Toka looked past them toward the town. "You mark this girl again, we mark you." One of the townsmen spat on the ground. "You got no right here." Toka just smiled. "Then why are your hands shaking?" The man with the noose stepped forward, puffing his chest. "This is white land. White laws." Amos spoke then, slow, deep. "This land wasn't yours to begin with. You just took it. And now you re-mad. 'Cause someone didn't let you take everything." The men faltered. Toka raised a hand. "We go. But she stays. And you leave them alone. Or next time we bring more than horses." With that, the riders turned, melted into the trees again like smoke. The mob scattered. Some walked backward. Some rode off. No words. Just the quiet shame of cowards when seen for what they are. When the last of them vanished down the trail, Clara exhaled. Her fingers clutched Amos's arm. "Why did they come?" she asked. Amos looked toward the trees. "Because you're not just mine," he said. "You're theirs too. And you belong to nobody." They stood there in silence as the sun broke fully over the trees. And for the first time in a long time, the earth felt still. That fall, the leaves burned gold along the ridges. Amos chopped wood every morning before sunrise, and Clara laid kindling like she'd always known how, with quiet hands and eyes that finally lifted when she looked folks in the face. No one came after them again. The town didn't forget, but it did something harder. It went quiet. That kind of silence wasn't surrender, but it wasn't war either. The men who once swore she was cursed began looking away when they passed Amos on the trail. The women who clutched their children tighter now only watched her from behind curtains, unsure what it meant when a girl like Clara still stood upright, shoulders square. Some mornings, Clara rode into town on her own. She /D trade soap or herbs for flour and returned with a paper-wrapped bundle of sugar under her arm. Once, she walked past Sheriff Henley on the porch of the post office. He tipped his hat and said nothing. She nodded back, nothing more. In December, snow fell heavy. Amos taught her to trap rabbit along the ridge. She taught him how to wrap wounds using willow bark and pine resin, a medicine her mother once made before the raids and camps and rail lines took everything but memory. At night, they didn't talk much. He /D sit at the table carving notches into a scrap of cedar. One for each day they weren't run out, one for each time she smiled without fear. She'd watch the fire, sometimes whispering in Comanche under her breath like it was a prayer, other times singing so soft even the wind couldn't catch the tune. Then spring came, and with it, the baby. She told him without fanfare. Just set a cup of coffee in front of him one morning, sat down across the table, and placed her hand flat over her belly. His eyes lifted slowly. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. He looked at her hand, then reached across the table and laid his own over hers. Gently, with reverence. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "Yours?" She blinked once, then twice. "Yes." He let out a breath that sounded like a man laying down a weight he /D been carrying too long. He took a long, slow breath. "And then I came here, to be alone." She reached out, her fingers brushing the worn edges of the tintype. She was beautiful. She was. Hallie looked at him, her eyes soft. "You loved her very much." He nodded. "Still do." The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. Hallie didn't ask anything else. She just sat there, a quiet presence in the cabin, and for the first time in a long time, Ransom didn't feel so alone. The next morning, he woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of her humming. She was already outside, stacking firewood by the fence line, a small, determined figure against the rising sun. He watched her for a moment, then stepped out onto the porch. "You don't have to do that," he said. She turned, a faint smile on her lips. "I know," and that was enough. He picked up his axe and joined her, the rhythm of their work a silent conversation. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now held the quiet hum of two lives intertwined. And in the heart of the wilderness, a new kind of home began to grow. This is the end of the story. Thank you for listening.